Hi, everybody. I met some of you during the conference, so I'm very excited to be here tonight with all of you. Thank you so much for staying with us until late night. Don't hesitate to eat during the conference and share your meal with us. We are happy to be in your home, probably for most of you tonight. We have three incredible speakers with me in this session. I'm very proud to be moderating this session. I feel it's a privilege to have the chance to moderate here tonight and being with you. So before we start, I just want to call out a few housekeeping notes. So first, make sure that your speakers are working. For further instruction, please go to the chat message for further directions. Please stay mute during the presentations. So always, we will probably have a problem, guys, but we will make it work and things will go away. I will ask that we hold all the questions until the end of all the presentations. So please keep note of your questions. We will have some time at the end to be able to ask questions and provide answers. That's going to be the really interesting part of the session. Use the Q&A function to ask questions. Simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any question, where is it, or you don't find it, you can always type question on the chat. These sessions are being recorded, and despite our best effort, not all questions will be able to be answered. The ministry will follow up with those questions we are not able to get to. You can always send questions to the speakers and get in touch with them. This is always really, really nice to receive questions and people are interested by your work. What we are trying to accomplish today is to broadly discuss environmental sustainability in a farming and agriculture context. And for that, I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Tiffany Travers. Tiffany is a Czech-Wetmunk farmer, land and seed steward at Four Sisters Farm. Tiffany, I hope I pronounced it correctly. I trained myself today to pronounce correctly, so I apologize if I didn't. I had videos to train myself, so I hope I did an okay job. Language learner and food sovereignty advocate. She's passionate about the uncomfortable work in dismantling structural racism within institutions and conducting experimental plant breeding projects to adapt nutrient-dense cultivar to our changing climate as a guest in Treaty 8 territory. So we further use Tiffany, the stage is yours. I'm very excited to hear you tonight. Thank you for being here.
Shem, Waihoquaitep Rasquestri Tiffany Travers, Soquepmuke, Stlaka ta Soquepmukulu ta Simp, Mutka na Progress. Hello, everyone. My name is Tiffany Travers. I'm the owner of Fourth Sister Farm, which is in the beautiful Peace region of the province we now know as BC. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Sylvain for the wonderful introduction. And yeah, I'm just going to get right to it. So if we could advance my slide, please. So a little bit about myself and the work that I do and the why I named our farm Fourth Sister Farm. So I am a Secwepemc mixed ancestry with European ancestry as well. And when we had the privilege of moving to the beautiful Treaty 8 territory, I really wanted to start not only growing our own food for ourselves, but to also be a steward of the land that I am a guest on. So my great-grandmother, the elder Sheila Palmer Kinbasket D. Hart, was the fourth sister of 7 sisters, 6 of which went to residential school, were taken from their families and put in these institutions. And I wanted to honor her memory and how much she taught me over the years of really loving the environment, loving the animals and the people and everything that comes with it. So that was just my way of honoring her. as well as considering myself to be much like the fourth sister to the land. We're familiar with the Three Sisters planting methodology, and I really felt that myself as the fourth sister to be the steward of the land. Next slide. Oh, could we move the slide forward, please? Thank you. Yeah, so just a little bit of the areas of focus that I do out here on my farm. So I'm just going to try and pin this. There we go. I do a lot of work around seed stewardship. So that entails caring for different indigenous seeds, as well as adapting those seeds to our changing climate. We have quite a challenging climate where we are about a 90-day growing season, as well as we deal with quite a bit of early frosts and drought. I also work on seed collection, what I could like to call seed collection succession planning. And so that is to help our aging elders that are caring for these large collection of seeds that are in their care, and helping get those seeds back to their people, which is what's entailed with rematriation work. I also am really passionate about the native ecosystem, which is here on our particular farm and in the surrounding area. So I do quite a bit of work with the native species here as well, as maintaining the diverse habitat that we have here. We have all sorts of animals that come through, they breed, they birth, they die here, and I really like to create as much as I can an untouched environment for them as well, while I'm farming and doing the seed work that I'm doing. On the flip side of that, I'm really passionate about doing some on-farm variety trials and experimentation. So I've been part of the Kenobi trialing, which is the Canadian Organic Vegetable Improvement Project, for the last several years, which is an amazing project, and that's done all over BC. I think we've actually extended that out across so-called Canada as well. And on this slide here, we talk about a bit of the activism work that I do. So I'm a member at large on the board of directors for Seed Change, as well as I sit on their executive committee. I also am part of the Equity Project Advisory Council for Farmers for Climate Solutions. And this has been a really amazing place for me to be that voice for equity-seeking farmers. One of our main, or two of our main barriers here that you can see on this slide have obviously been capital and land access for equity-deserving farmers. I also sit in a climate policy advisory council for Indigenous climate action, where we actually take some of the climate reports and policies, and we've been breaking them down and decolonizing them to ensure that Indigenous voices are heard within those policies. Next slide. Okay, one of the big projects I want to talk about, and I don't want to speak for the other researchers that are a part of this because we're not quite finished. It's a 2-year project. I'm actually taking part in this beautiful collaborative research project with some researchers from Agri-Foods Canada. We go to the next slide. And we can talk about the overview. So the who would be myself as an Indigenous farmer, land and seed steward, as well as you can see my team there from AAFC. This is a project that we're conducting this year and as well as next year. And what we're trying to do with this project, we received a grant for $55,000 to conduct this research over the next 2 years, using 5 different manure inputs from the various animals that are at our farm in this closed loop system. So basically you see on the right there, that's our plot that we set up here on the farm. Really wanting to do a decolonized approach to this research, allowing me to choose, when I would do the seeding, what type of seed that I would choose, how large the plot would be, and various things that I could pick and choose what we wanted to look at throughout the project, which is, I think, an incredible thing to do. I mean, I laughed because one of the seeds that was thrown back and forth was, they're like, oh, well, do we want to grow canola? And I was like, no. I want to grow something for at the end of the project, we actually have some food, because I would really like to, because we're growing so much of, we're doing fabas the first year and a heirloom oat in the second year. I want to be able to have some food at the end of that we can actually share out with community when we do our information sessions. So basically that's sort of the decolonized approach to the research that we're doing here in this project. Next slide, please. Yeah, and so this is the vision for the project. We want to be able to grow these 2 different types of crops over the next 2 years, basically overlapping and layering the blended approaches to Indigenous-led as well as the Western science methodologies that our researchers are going to help us use. And then in the end, we want to be able to share our learnings with the community. Really, this is a project that I envision to be something that would absolutely benefit our community. Next slide, please. And just a quick slide of meeting the team. So these are the different critters on our farm that are actually eating perennial forage crops. Here we've got our sweet cow, Blackie, the Dexter, and our mixed swine. We've raised some Duroc and Berkshire hogs, as well as our little Banty chickens. And then I've got my equines there, Ridley, Clinty, and Willie. And then not shown here are the red wigglers that we have. So we're doing a vermicompost section as well. Next slide, please. And these are just a few of the observations that we've had into our first year, and we're not done yet. We actually haven't harvested the favas yet, which in itself is basically telling of our changing climate, because typically we would have a killing frost here by about, end of August. So they're actually still out in the field growing, which is amazing. And just giving you an idea of the different things that we've noticed around the farm. Up in this little right-hand corner, I don't know if you can see that there, but it actually showed that we had a frost, a late frost in June. And that really is something that would impact when I would have seeded these crops. So, it's this game that we play between when the soil is hot enough and being able to have enough time for the seeds to reach maturity. So those were sort of the things that factored into how I would be going about the project. Next slide, please. And this is how it's going. I took this picture a couple days ago, and that's the fava plots, and they're looking beautiful, and the seeds are maturing really well. So I'm out there every day checking on them to make sure that I'm not going to miss my opportunity to pull them out of the field and have them finish maturing and drying inside. Next slide. This is a visual that I did just showing the cyclical nature of how things are growing. So we're going from the seeding stage all the way through to flowering, setting the pods, and then also the drying of the pods, which we don't have any information there because it hasn't happened yet. The black arrows are showing when we input. So that would have been when we input our manures. And then the brown lines coming out are when we did are doing our soil sampling, as well as our rhizosphere sampling, which would have happened at the new moon time. Next slide, please. And I'm not sure if anyone can read that, but this is just a bit of a summary of the different topics that I really would love to discuss further, in other realms, because I can see that I have 10 seconds left here, or I think I'm kind of gone over, but yeah, so these are just a few of the things that I would really love to talk to policymakers about. Next slide is just my contact information. Yeah, so thank you, everyone. I'm really looking forward to hearing the other presentations.
Thank you, Tiffany. It was really impressive. I have so many questions on everything you did. Unfortunately, I cannot ask you questions, so I will wait for the end, and I'm sure that everybody in the audience is that way. I feel like this is so impressive what you're doing. It's so great. I just want to know more. So thank you very much for that. Now, our second speaker, I would like to introduce Dr. Deborah Anderson. She's the director of the Institute for Sustainable Horticulture and Leaf Regional Innovation Chair at Kwantlen Polytechnic University. For the audience who are not familiar with that, a Leaf Regional Innovation Chair is probably the most important role that an academic can have in BC. So we are very lucky to have Dr. Anderson with us tonight. So thank you very much, Deborah, for being here with us tonight. It's really a privilege to be able to listen to you. So Dr. Anderson leads an active applied research program in biological and non-chemical management of agriculture and landscape pests and disease, and develop environmentally sound bioproduct in partnership with industry. And this is a topic that's very close to my heart. This is what I also do in research. This ability to navigate academy and industry and to link both is really where we're going to see the cutting edge technology and discovery of the next decade. So I'm very excited for your talk. Now the stage is yours. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Sylvain. Sustainability and resilience in BC agriculture. Next slide, please. I'd also like to say that our Kwantlen campus in Langley is on the Kwantlen traditional and unceded territory, and that is where I have the privilege to work. So sustainability is, we all know, is environmental, economic, and social. And the definition that I truly like for sustainability is the simplest one ever. It's the terms and conditions under which humans continue to exist on the planet. It's not about saving the planet, it's about saving us. Next slide, please. And environmental sustainability of BC farms is very, very current, in our current context, means resilience to climate change. Now, we have some vulnerabilities just as a province, a small land mass, and a growing population. Next slide, please. But we also have some advantages. Next slide, please. Oh, you got it. The agricultural land reserve is one of them. The population, even though it's growing, is highly aware of environmental issues and pretty supportive. A population also wants local food, and a young generation who I see myself with a new interest in farming. We do have a vibrant innovation culture, which has been mentioned before tonight, and the private sector is developing tools and processes to support agricultural sustainability and resilience. I see a lot of these industry partners walking in my door, actually. And we have public institutions, including my own and Simon Fraser and UFV and others that are focused on agricultural sustainability. Next slide, please. The 6 themes of regenerative agriculture, and I thought these probably would be mentioned by now, but maybe I'm the first, are limiting soil disturbance, which means physical and chemical disturbance, which both damages soil and microbial populations and the structure and chemical nature of the soil. Building diversity, which means in cropping systems, in rotations, in species. Protecting the soil with a cover of plants at all times if possible. Integrating animals in any way we can because it improves nutrient cycling. And increasing wildlife habitat for pollination, pest management, ecosystem health. And simply designing too our systems for natural climate events, which we are expecting, like floods, carbon sequestration, water regulation is a big one. And all of these are in the hands of farmers to control. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about healthy soil and give you a couple of examples of organisms that contribute to a healthy soil and one process that is very damaging to healthy soil. So as you know, soil is made up of many, many living things, and soil bacteria, algae, protozoa, fungi, they all need organic matter to survive. In fact, they're all part of the organic matter of the soil. But living plants provide very directly food for this living population. And in photosynthesis, takes CO2 from the atmosphere and delivers it to the soil as sugars and carbohydrates. Nutrients in turn feed on those nutrients and provide the plant with phosphorus and nitrogen. However, when chemical fertilizers are used, the plant doesn't need to work with the microbial community, and their root exudates actually change. It's like a plant can go to the fast food store and get all the nutrients it needs, and so it doesn't actually need to go to the grocery store and buy the ingredients to put together food and cook it themselves. Those microbial partners, when they're not summoned, eventually they die off and they deplete in the soil. The first example I wanted to talk about is Mycorrhizae. And it's a symbiotic fungus that colonizes the roots of plants and extends the roots by about 100-fold. And literally their name means fungal roots. Next slide, please. So mycorrhizae produce a glue-like protein called glomalin in great abundance. And glomalin is, we believe that they produce this in order to translocate water and nutrients along very long hyphae. But it also binds together mineral particles in the soil into clumps, and clumping is a good thing for soil. Now, when mycorrhizae are lost, the glomalin is lost also. However, it takes a very long time to degrade in the soil. And so you don't necessarily associate losing the mycorrhizae with losing the glomalin in that moment, because it can take up to 42 years. But by the same token, it can take up to 42 years to build it back up to a very effective level again. So the soil needs mycorrhizae to be resilient. Next slide, please. That glomalin counts for a huge amount of soil carbon. Possibly a third of the world's soil carbon is in that material. And losing it results in significant loss of greenhouse gas neutralization. So for that reason, it's tremendously important to protect it. And all of those regenerative management practices protect mycorrhizae and therefore this glomalin or glue that holds our soil together. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how chemical inputs damage soil microbes. And this is a real example from one of our recent studies on a biofertilizer developed from brewery waste. It's a high protein fertilizer with high nitrogen content. And we compared it to an industry standard slow release fertilizer on an annual flowering crop in 2 native soil types and 1 horticultural media. So we got measurable and positive impacts of the biofertilizer on root development and plants, which were just as good or better than the chemical fertilizer. But the impact on the microbial community was even a surprise to us. Next slide, please. It was a very fast impact. This was 110 days after our treatments, and our treatments included, it was soil and media from these different places. And we added either slow release fertilizer or the biofertilizer in 1 of 2 timings, either weekly top dressing or bi-weekly top dressing. So the yellow bars in this graph indicate the bacterial counts in that soil before we started the experiment. So these are what was there before the plants, before everything. And they're actually a little bit different. It's hard to tell on this slide, but they're significantly different. They're significantly higher in the clay silt and sandy loam than they were in the sunshine mix. And when we apply the red bar is the slow release fertilizer application 110 days later, with a plant in the soil and the fertilizer and what's happening with that bacterial count. And we didn't see that much difference with the sunshine mix, which is horticultural media, but we saw suppression of that population in both of the natural soil environments. The 2 blue bars are the biofertilizer applications, the weekly and biweekly. And you can see they really increased in a very short period of time, that bacterial action in the soil and the bacterial population. So biofertilizers support a healthy microbial community just by feeding them, and the slow release fertilizer is damaging to it. Next slide, please. So we also know that bacterial and fungal families suppress soil pathogens. They have members that suppress soil pathogens. Trichoderma is one of those, and like the Mycorrhizae, it's a group of beneficial fungi found in association with plant roots. Many species are well known for their suppression and also growth stimulation. We've been working on Trichoderma for a number of years and bringing new products to registration in Canada. Next slide, please. This is the picture that launched that research initiative. We had soil that had killed, it actually had diseases from a nursery in the Fraser Valley that had killed some plants. There was so much disease, so much pathogen in there. And we treated the ones on the left with water, and we divided the soil into 2, and we treated the soil on the right with a Trichoderma that we had in the lab that we are actually moving towards registration. And then we waited a week and we planted lettuce, and we got 20% germination in the diseased soil, and we got 85% germination in the diseased soil that had been treated with the Trichoderma. So this is what's possible. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one. This shows the biostimulation, but I think I'm running out of some time. But it shows you on the right, these are lettuce seeds that were exposed to Trichoderma volatile compounds only, and the volatiles only induced quicker germination, bigger root development, and bigger plants. And volatiles are how plants communicate in the soil. Next slide, please. So our next challenge will be to use something like a trichoderma or other organisms to indicate suppressiveness of soil or soil health, and as a direct measure so that you can actually monitor changes in your soil with the inputs that you're putting in. And this is all coming, and in the literature, there actually is an indication that Trichoderma could be used as an indicator species. Also, a bacteria called a fluorescent pseudomonad group of bacteria, and a number of other measures that are used as indirect. But the direct measures are what we're hoping to focus on in the next little while. Next slide, please. So my take-home messages are: a healthy soil community supports crops and helps them deal with stress. And we experienced this summer heat domes, drought, and floods. It's a pretty good selection of stresses. Soil microbial populations respond quickly to a change in practice, and we showed that with our biofertilizer study. And all of the regenerative practices build healthy soil microbial communities. Over time, these communities will become more stable and resilient. The organic matter will increase, and more stable organic matter, such as humus, will build up, and that's where we need to go. The soil will be sustainable, as will the farm and the farmer. Next slide, please. So I'd like to thank the students and staff at the Institute for Sustainable Horticulture, and call a shout out to the Ministry of Agriculture Innovation Branch for supporting the development of our native Trichoderma species as new biofungicide products. And also we have had many years of support from agricultural industry associations, IFBC, IRAP, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and NSERC, CFI, BC Knowledge Development Fund, ECHO Canada, and Youth Employment Strategy Program. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Deborah. This was really impressive scientific data. I'm still seeing this image with the two sides and the incredible effect that you're reporting. This is quite mind-blowing. So thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. So now I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, which is Dr. Lochlan, if I'm correct, and sorry if I did wrong with your name. I apologize for you too. Lochlan Fraser is a professor and senior NSERC Industrial Research Chair in Ecosystem Reclamation at Thompson River University, the inaugural director of the Center for Ecosystem Reclamation, and an associate member of the University of British Columbia Department of Biology. Dr. Fraser's research is related to mine site tailing and reclamation, grassland diversity and restoration, and rangeland ecology and climate change. So I hope the audience will appreciate how our speakers are coming from different angles and bringing such a wide source of knowledge for us tonight. So the stage is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvain. I am very grateful to be a guest living on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Secwepemc Nation. I'd like to talk today about sustainable rangeland management. Next slide, please. Grasslands only occupy around 1% of our province, and grasslands are utilized by the ranching industry. And so when I talk about grazing and grazing practices, I'll mainly be talking about grasslands, but of course, cattle graze in forested areas as well. And we will briefly touch on that. It's the little red bits there you see in the map that's grassland. Next slide, please. There's a number of hypotheses on what happens when cows graze. And on the x-axis, you have grazing intensity going from left to right. On the y-axis is forage productivity or carbon sequestration. And that horizontal line in the middle is no effect. It's a zero effect. And there's three models shown here. A is where cows will graze, and there's a reduction in plant production and a reduction in carbon sequestration. B shows no effect for a certain amount of intensity of grazing, and then it's negative. C, however, shows that with grazing, there's actually an increase in plant productivity and soil carbon sequestration. And it's these models that we're playing with in our research. Next slide, please. Of course, we don't always need to graze grass. We also hay our pastures. And one of the questions that comes about is at what cutting height should we hay at? And does that matter? And if we apply some of these principles of grazing and the effect on plant production, this may have significant impacts on how we cut our hay. Sarah is doing a cutting experiment up in the Chilcotin. You can see on the top graph, the bar graph with the green and blue bars, there's various treatments, and these are stubble height treatments where we have cut the grass. Either we don't cut the grass at all, that's our control on the far right, or we cut it at 30 centimeters, 25, 20 centimeters, and so on. And we measure the output. The concept here is compensatory growth of the plant community. Grasses their meristematic growth tissue is at ground level. And so, of course, if you cut it, they'll continue to grow. But what happens below ground is really important, because those are the roots and the root systems. And with a cutting event, roots will slough off into the soil and help build soil carbon. We're also measuring below ground, and that's the graph on the bottom there that you see in brown. And we're looking at how different cutting heights might influence root biomass. In other words, soil carbon. Next slide, please. Now, grazing not only influences productivity potentially, as well as soil carbon sequestration, but grazing also has an effect on plant biodiversity. And this is a global survey that was conducted and compiled information from studies around the world that looked at plant communities that have been grazed and paired with neighboring plant communities where no grazing has occurred. With these paired plots, we were able to compare the effect of grazing on biodiversity. And that horizontal line you see on the graph is also a zero effect. And as you can see, the regression line is always above that zero line, indicating that even at very low plant productivity, there's going to be a positive effect on grazing, on plant diversity with grazing. Next slide, please. So taking these ideas into consideration, the effects of grazing on productivity, on plant diversity, we wanted to test a grazing management practice known as management intensive grazing. Next slide, please. Management intensive grazing is a system of forage use in which herds are regularly and systematically moved to fresh rested areas with the intent to maximize forage growth. Next slide, please. And so we can think of this on a continuum where intensive grazing is management intensive and extensive is more traditional. Next slide, please. We identified ranches in the Caribou and the Thompson area that use this practice. Next slide, please. And this is the practice in operation, often using electric fencing to move the cattle on a daily basis. Next slide. And what we find is that soil carbon in the management intensive grazing is higher than soil carbon in extensive. And we also measured organic carbon as well. Next slide, please. And we can also look at different soil depths. And you can see that intensive managed is the top line on that figure, indicating extensive has higher carbon at deeper depths in the soil, up to about 20 centimeters. Next slide, please. We have a current grazing trial we are manipulating the number of cows and the time that they spend in pasture. Next slide, please. We've identified 50 by 50 meter paddocks, and we've got extensive grazing with 1 cow-calf pair at 10 days and extensive grazing with 10 cow-calf pairs for 1 day. And we have a control plot. We also have targeted grazing. Next slide, please. And this is Mark Haywood Farmer working on the Chutter Ranch, helping us lay out the plots. Next slide, please. And these, we have to water the cows as well to make sure they have water. Next slide, please. And that's our extensive grazing trial. You can see the amount of grazing. Next slide, please. And what we see here, this is a percent cover of grasses, forbs, and grasses and forbs. And what we see is that grasses increase in intensive and forbs increase in extensive. Next slide, please. We also did look at targeted grazing, where we use cows to target spotted knapweed, and targeted grazing was extremely effective at removing spotted knapweed, which is actually a fairly, as we found, has nutritive value for cattle. So it's the timing of the grazing that's critical here. Next slide, please. As I mentioned right off the bat, grasslands are not the only areas grazed. Well, approximately half of the province is under grazing tenure, which means a lot of forest is under grazing tenure. Next slide, please. And we have a fairly unique project with Dr. John Church at near Kelowna, where we are applying strip harvested silvopasture. Next slide, please. These areas are strip thinned at different widths. Next slide, please. And this is the location. Next slide. And these were harvested 2018, 45-year-old lodgepole pine, so it's a mid-rotation stand. Next slide. And this gives you an idea of the different strip widths. Next slide. And these are the research questions. Next slide. And next slide. And next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Now this is Dr. John Church's expertise in using drones to measure multispectral imagery and measure NDVI. And this just gives you a taste of some of the results that are still emerging from this research, but we do find differences in NDVI with respect to strip. Next slide, please. So to summarize, management practices can influence forage productivity and soil carbon sequestration in grasslands. Non-native invasive species may be controlled by grazing and silvopasture, can potentially lead to increased forage opportunity and range. Next slide, please. I acknowledge many of my sponsors, all of the students and my colleagues in helping in this work. And I also want to point out BC Acorn. It's an important networking service in British Columbia that helps to bring academics, industry, and government together to tackle these important questions. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fraser. Very interesting talk and so many research. That's really impressive. So thank you for presenting that tonight and sharing that with us. So for the audience with us tonight, please, that's time for the question and answer. So if you have any question for three speakers, please ask them with the Q&A. Maybe, you know, I will try to find, to ask question, and maybe I can start with one of the questions for the speakers. So the first one is, what unique challenges, opportunity does BC have compared to other jurisdictions? So any one of you guys can take on that question. Please go ahead. That's you know, that it sounds an easy question, but that's a tough question.
Well, I would start with our extreme geographic diversity within the province, and the fact that, you know, we have rainforests and deserts and everything in between, and also our rugged topography, and I think all of that together is quite a challenge. We have, you know, many different climatic zones, you know, trying to work within that system is a big challenge.
Thank you. Deborah or Tiffany, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure. We also have more than 250 different crops.
Yes. You know, one challenge and opportunity in some ways, but the real opportunity is the size of BC for me. Like, this is an incredible potential to land, but also a challenge because we cannot, you know, do agriculture everywhere. So there is a lot of land that are just not available to use. So this kind of, like, you know, balance between the ability to have such an incredible territory, but also the difficulty in terms of preservation and different other points. That's kind of one of the challenge and opportunity for me too. Tiffany, do you see a challenge or opportunity?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with Dr. Fraser and, you know, Dr. Henderson. I think having such a diverse, like, for me, when I look at it, I look at it from a seed adaptation point of view, just because that's my area of work and expertise. And that's one of the things that I really want to see us, you know, get more into, are creating these, you know, regional sort of hubs where we're, you know, adapting seed to our different climates, sharing that seed around freely with each other, so that we're actually really bolstering our seed that we're using for most crops. You know, you see a lot of people growing in, you know, your perfect places to grow, but I really think that there should be a little bit more emphasis put on, you know, say growing things further north, or growing things, you know, in areas where there is more drought, and really putting those, you know, those seeds and crops to the test, because I think that's going to be part of ensuring that we have like really strong seed and crops for the future. Instead of having them locked up in Svalbard, because I really don't feel that that's the way to do it. You know, the seeds need to be adapting alongside us as we go. And it really needs to be that they're in the people's hands growing them.
We had a really neat project that was running for a couple of years. One of my students collected seed from 4 different species of native grass, and they collected the seed in California, Oregon, Washington, and BC from south to north, and collected 10 populations of each of these 4 species. So basically different genotypes, and measured these plants in their location, collected seed, and then we established a common garden in Kamloops. And the question was just that, Tiffany. We were looking at, you know, how these various genotypes responded to a different climate, and whether there could be value in addressing the opportunities of assisted migration, if this was something that could be considered. It may be considered controversial as well, because you're shifting new genotypes into a different environment, and there may be issues relating to that, and that's something that needs to be discussed. But our climate is changing. We heard from Dr. Weaver, our climate is changing, and perhaps it's changing too fast for our plants to adapt.
Well, thank you guys for the interesting point of view. Like, I really appreciate that. We have a second question. Second question is, what does environmental sustainability mean to you? So Deborah, I was wondering if we can start with you. So the question is, what does environmental sustainability mean to you?
I think that was probably in my second or third slide. In the current context, it means resiliency to withstand the impacts of climate change. And that's like right across the board. It's not just agriculture, it's for the whole province, it's for the population. It is the terms and conditions also under which we continue to survive on the planet. It's the rules of engagement.
Thank you, Deborah. Tiffany, I want to come to you now, because I feel like there is also a personal answer from you on what sustainability means.
Yeah, you know, I would have to agree. I think that I mean, even just the term regenerative agriculture, it means we're working in this holistic system, and I think for as long as agriculture has been around, we've really been removing ourselves from everything else that's going on around us. So I think these are the ways that regenerative agriculture can be helping to sustain us and help us to adapt, while at the same time ensuring that we're not creating more negative impacts to the ecosystem. You know, myself, I call myself a farmer, but it's actually a misnomer. Like, I'm not really a farmer. Most Indigenous people actually aren't agriculturists. Like, I really am more on the side of subsistence living where I am. So I actually do forage for more native species. And so that to me is like a big concentration with, you know, what is going to sustain us long term, is to ensuring that we're not further separating ourselves in agriculture from the ecosystem around us. We really need to be working together and not separating further.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think this is really kind of like an important message that the new generation is also bringing us to, like this kind of understanding of others, and what your talk really presented to us tonight. I thought that was really a key message that you gave us. So thank you so much. Dr. Fraser?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said, and I would say, you know, environmental sustainability is about healthy functioning ecosystems, fully functioning ecosystems, and that's with, you know, with energy and productivity flow, and nutrient cycling, clean water, and also, of course, thinking about future generations and maintaining those healthy ecosystems for future generations.
Well, you know, if we go a little bit deeper into that conversation, what do you think environmental sustainability mean for for diverse sectors such as livestock, fisheries, and agriculture? Do you think there is some kind of specificity for each sectors?
Is that question for me?
Yeah, sure.
I'm only really familiar with the ranching industry, and you know, I see ranchers as being sustainable stewards of the land. If the land that cows graze on is not available for grazing in the next season, then there's not going to be healthy cows. And so there's a real incentive for the ranchers to work with the land, work with grazing management practices in order to maintain that sustainability, that resistance and resilience of the plant community. But I can't speak for other industries.
Deborah, Tiffany, do you want to add anything to this question?
Sure. I work mostly with the plant-based industries and in the kind of traditional, conventional agriculture, not traditional, organic and conventional. And there are specific challenges, particularly with annual crops and tillage and requiring tilling. And I know with the grains, you can drill and you can not till. There are no-till systems, but there really aren't similar systems available for like high-intensity vegetable crops, for instance. And I think it becomes more important then to think of other ways to support the soil environment, because some of those practices you're not going to be able to take out of the system. So how you manage the rest of the system can be quite important.
Thank you. Maybe for our next question, and that will be our final question for tonight, I will start with Tiffany. So, like I want to kind of push the boundaries a little bit, guys, and kind of tell us what is the future. What the future of farming look like in terms of environmental sustainability. Like today, like everybody I meet is talking to me about agtech, agriculture technology, or genetics, or so. What does the future of farming look like, or what do you know? What do you hear into your circles that we should be aware of, or that you think that this is really something that's going to be important in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, Sylvain, you're probably not going to like my answer, but I actually personally feel that tech is probably not the way that we should be going. And I just to be a little bit controversial, having a regenerative agricultural conference and having agritech be a part of that feels a little bit almost hypocritical, because I really feel that when we're looking at regenerative agriculture, we are going back down to the soil health, and really drilling down to, what we may have done to the environment and the ecosystem and finding ways to fix that. And I really personally don't feel that, more tech is necessarily the answer to that. And I mean, I can't wait to hear you speak on Thursday about the solutions you do have, because I'm not going to poo-poo on your work. But yeah, like personally for me, I actually am a really huge proponent of the new living labs that are starting to be, that are going to start to be a more common thing, where we can actually start getting together more and not being in our little silos. Like you have grazing, you have soil microbial health, you have the native species, like to bring that all together and really base it off of not only our ecosystem, but say particular watersheds. I think that's kind of where we were going with wanting to focus that research. I think that we're actually really going to find ways that we can be helping each other out with this research.
I don't think we disagree, Tiffany. I think first, thank you for your opinion and being so honest. It's so great. I don't think agtech is the answer. And I think for me, like this is very important in the future, that we go in several directions. I think one of the issues of the past is we went in one direction and all in. And I think this aspect where we could have several solutions that could adapt to several challenges is probably what we need. And also for me, agtech is really wide. It could go from like, the drone that you get, or the technology of picking berries, but it could go also with chemical, with different new species that we introduce in the field, with this idea of cycle agriculture that you also presented. So all that are very new technologies. So maybe that also another angle we can do. We don't have time now, but if you start me on that, I will not stop all night, guys. Dr. Fraser, Dr. Adelson, please, I want to give you some room for having also your opinion on the future.
Deborah?
I think our basic challenge is that our population is too big for everyone to be able to grow their own food, even though I love that idea, and that's how I grew up. We need agritech to do a lot of things. Always when I work with agritech companies, it's the bar is it going to help? Is it going to improve regenerative is it going to help regenerative agriculture? Is it going to feed people? So that's my bar, and it's not purist, I don't think. It's kind of...
But it's very important, though. Very, very important. Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. Dr. Fraser, you have the last word for tonight. Make it count.
Well, I hear what Tiffany is saying, and I agree with Deborah as well as with you, Sylvain, because I do think that there is a need for a return to basic principles and the building of soil. I think we can use agritech, and one of the things that we are challenged with is carbon sequestration and how we measure it. And we really need those technologies to better understand and enhance. And these can be instruments, but we can also use biological tools and microbiota and genomic tools, and also remote sensing. So, I think it's a real opportunity to bring together all of these in a way to improve agriculture, but at a local level. I do think that it's really necessary to encourage the family farm, encourage the next younger generation in getting into farming. So even though we couldn't hear that video, I sensed that was sort of what it was about. So I encourage that.
As professors, we see that, for me, I see a lot of new generation coming to agriculture and to agtech and being super passionate and trying to understand. It has been such a pleasure to see that in the new generation. So, and I'm sure there is a ton of them in the audience. So I want to thank you, all of you tonight, for sharing the evening with us. I want to thank the speakers. I really feel privileged to have this discussion with you guys. I'm sorry we have to close right now. I have probably 10 more questions that I want to discuss with you. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to come visit you in person and see what you're doing. This is really, very groundbreaking. I would encourage all of you kind of reach out to the speakers. This is really an incredible work and unique, and we have the privilege to have those people in BC. This is really rare. I want to thank you, the audience, for staying with us until the end and sharing your evening with us and listening to us. I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow at 6 p.m. for presentation on regenerative agriculture and success stories. There is still a lot of speakers that are so great to listen tomorrow and Wednesday. So I hope I'll meet you all there tomorrow. Thank you so much and have a good night.
Thank you.